I do think people are just kind of getting tired of him. He's yesterday's news, want to turn the page. I think like not going back was an effective slogan because it's just like, let's just move on, man.
Yeah.
Because you see like he did a panel with Univision Latino voters, and you could just see the fatigue and the
Mm.
questioning, like, we're just tired of this song and dance of the election was stolen and I have the biggest crowds. And you see it in the crowd size. I mean, he was the only one who cared about crowd size when in 2016, and now
Mm.
it's come full circle because he cannot fill these mid-size arenas, and Kamala Harris is filling out the big ones that maybe he used to do.
Mm.
And so that is one thing that gives me hope, as imperfect of a signal as a crowd rally attendance is. It
Yeah.
shows me that the enthusiasm gap is real.
Hello and welcome to Eric McElroy's American Exchange with me, Eric McElroy. Funny how that works. Every time it surprises me. My name's in there. Um, this week on the podcast, we welcome Toby Morishanu. Toby is a comedian who I met many, many years ago when he worked and lived in London. He's now since gone back to the US and he lives in LA, where he works in a number of different areas. He's an advocate for housing reform, still does comedy and other work. You can find him on TikTok, on Insta, on Twitter as well, as it still exists. And I refuse to call it X. I'm just going to stick with Twitter because that's the way I am. We had a in-depth discussion, found out how he sees the race for the White House at this stage of the game, but also we had a policy discussion, something that in a normal political era you would do. And because he has a specialist interest in housing, we have a look at Kamala's housing policies that she put forward versus Trump's, let's just have tariffs because tariffs is a beautiful word. It's Trump's favorite word. If you haven't seen those clips, go find them because it's weird. So it was great to have Toby on. And this is Toby Morishanu. Oh, and if you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe and do all the YouTube things you need to do as well as we grow the empire. Here's Toby. Well, I'm very excited to welcome to the podcast Toby Morishanu. Toby and I met a long time ago when he was here in London. He's now gone back to the US. And Toby, I always start these things off because the whole idea is that I stayed here for whatever reason. You've gone back for better food and less healthcare, I suppose. What is the vibe? You're West Coast.
Yeah.
So how's it going? How you feeling coming down to the election? We're a couple weeks away.
I am
What's the
based here in
vibe?
Los Angeles, so take that for what it's worth. But I go back and forth every single day. The polls are like flat for the last 2 months, and yet my vibe internally, my internal polling, if you will,
Mm,
is that one day I feel very confident, one day I feel terrified. I feel like coming down the stretch, Kamala's been showing some strength. I was super happy to see her like do a Fox News appearance.
yeah.
I was happy to, see a lot more content coming out from, Dave Bautista and like all of these sort of people. And meanwhile, Trump has been seemingly fading. He's canceling
Mm,
appearances. It looks like early voting is strong. But, like everyone else who is not a Trump supporter in America, I have some PTSD from 2016 and 2020 and feeling like, oh, we got this. Early voting
yeah.
signs are good. We're going to sweep this. And then all of a sudden it's like, ooh, this is a lot closer than I thought. And nowadays, you gotta have to keep in mind that the polls, even flat as they are a lot closer than they were in
Yeah.
2020 and even 2016. So, yeah, I'm not sleeping particularly restfully, but I guess the last few days I've been feeling a little bit better, seeing um, Kamala making some strong moves, seeing a lot of people activated around volunteering or trying to finish strong, and seeing on the other side of the coin, the Trump campaign not seeming to have that same strong finish.
They've got Elon Musk on their side doing whatever the fuck he's doing for them. I don't know if that's it's the vibe I get from because I mean, I know they've been fighting the weird label. Elon's
Mhm.
weird.
I think,
Even if he
I've
is a
heard mixed things
genius, the
about,
weird genius.
yeah, I mean, I go back and forth. I mean, I'm old school. I think it's possible to melt your brain with cocaine. Like, I, I know he has done great things in the past. For a long time, I was an Elon defender. I was like, he made
Yeah.
SpaceX, he did, Tesla, he did PayPal. I mean, how many people are there that can have like three home runs in one career from a technology
Mm,
perspective. But then, around the time when he was, trying to do a submarine rescue and calling people pedophiles, I was like, this guy isn't totally on the level. And now, seeing him do stuff with Twitter, or now X,
yeah.
the network formerly known as Twitter. One tweet that sticks out of my mind that resonated with me was like, I thought he was a genius when he was doing rockets because I know nothing about rockets. And then he started doing stuff with software, and I know something about software, and I can tell he's an idiot. And I I am a former engineer, and like him like having engineers print out code to like review it with him just makes no sense whatsoever. And it's just like
Mm,
once you see the signs that someone is doing things that are completely irrational and there's no basis in like, some sort of genius or whatever, then you're like, I don't know. I mean, you can't ignore that. You can't be like,
yeah.
oh, he's just an eccentric guy. You have to be like, he's at least 50% an idiot, and the 50% that's genius must be luck or something that's missing now, or maybe, some people are just like very compartmentalized. Like, you have like people like Kyrie Irving, who's like a genius
Mm.
at basketball, believes the world is flat. I mean, it's possible to have specialized intelligence, but I wouldn't call him a genius in an all-encompassing sense of the word because I have no faith that, he would be better than what he posts on Twitter all day.
So you're saying the Earth isn't flat? Sorry, I just need to clarify
I
that.
should have opened with that.
I think you're on the
When he
wrong
said I've gone back to the
podcast.
other side of
Oh
the
wait.
world, I was imagining a globe, but it was totally false.
um, I mean, I mean, maybe either he's a great huckster like Trump is, and maybe that's the attraction that they're appealing with each other, drawn to each other for that, or maybe that level of money and fame and all of those things just messes with your head. I mean, I don't know.
I do think there's an element of that. I mean, he's sure he's surrounded by yes men.
Mm.
I have heard he does a lot of drugs and stuff like that,
Well,
and
he said he does drugs. I mean,
oh, he
he's been
has? I
really
didn't
open
realize
about
that.
it. Yeah, I think he's
Huh.
admitted doing, well, he smoked weed on Rogan's podcast. I think on Don Lemon, he admitted doing drugs, or Don Lemon asked him about his drug use, and then because he's taking ketamine
Mm.
for medicinal purposes, and because he's also a racehorse, and that's I don't know. You're in LA, so you know more about drugs than I do. I don't know.
Well, yeah, ketamine is a thing. I'll be honest. So the last, I don't know, 5, 7 years, whatever, I've been generally working in uh, social media production and promotion for media organizations.
Mm,
And the last organization I worked for before they laid me and a lot of other people off was called Freethink. And it was, sort of like, it was like techno optimist kind of a publication. It's still out there, there's still friends there, they're doing good work. But one of the things we covered was like drug legalization. There's psilocybin, there's shrooms. Yeah, shrooms and psilocybin are the same thing. But like there's various drugs that are getting legalized or used for medicinal purposes now that were for a long time banned. And one of them is ketamine.
mm.
And we definitely did some videos about like ketamine clinics and people talking about how great ketamine was. And I was like, you sound like a huge drug addict.
We had one of the venues you might have played for me. I don't know if you remember this one because it was around the time I had it around the time before you left London. Was at a pub in Farncombe in Surrey. I don't know if you ever came out there, and it was a Wednesday night gig. It was called the Cavern, and there was a number of drug raids on the pub while I ran comedy there, and the entire staff
Coincidence?
were addicted to ketamine, and it was a monthly gig, and every month I would go down, and they were just thinner and thinner and thinner, and things were getting like sold off of the pub. It eventually closed. It's flats now. So okay, so we've got so the vibe is the typical vibe. You think it's nervousness, but a hope and all of those things. And I guess in LA, it's so heavily democratic. You know.
Yeah, I mean, we have like a bunch of hair signs on my street, They did get stolen once, so there is,
Okay.
an element. I mean, the one thing about, electoral politics in the US that you'll hear, there's more Trump voters in LA County than in a lot of red states, just because
Mm,
LA County is so massive.
yeah, of
Um,
course.
yeah.
But they're
So
overwhelmed.
there are people who support him here, but in terms of the actual voting results, it's blue across the board, basically. in Los Angeles. And then you get out, there's a few swing districts if you drive down towards Orange County, about
Mhm.
hour and a half, depending on traffic, out to the San Gabriel Valley or whatever. So I do have friends who are like going out there to knock on doors and stuff like that. But
Yeah,
yeah, you don't
because
see a lot of like Trump signs here.
the thing, because I'm from a blue state, and so is my wife. So, but I still think it's about points on the board, and the more votes that we have, the more message that's there. Even if you're from a blue state, and you think, oh, what difference does it make? It makes a difference. I mean, even if, God forbid, we lose the electoral college again, but if it's he has to lose the popular vote, and
Mhm.
he, and also other blue candidates that would be on the ballot. What's the vibe around your Senate candidate, Adam Schiff? Because Donald Trump loves to go after him. He's called him, and he recently this week has called Adam Schiff one of the enemies of the people that he'd like to go after if he becomes president again. Is Adam liked as a politician generally?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, he's going to cruise to victory in the Democratic or in the general election. He won the
Yeah.
Democratic primary fairly easy. It was a very contested Democratic primary with him, Katie Porter, Barbara Lee, like a bunch of big names were running because Senate
Yeah.
seats don't open up in California that often. So like,
No.
and they have obviously we have a big population and a lot of prominent people. So, it's very contested once it opens up. But he won fairly easily in the
Hmm.
primary, and he's going to beat like I think it's Steve Garvey, who's like a former baseball player running as a Republican, and he'll
Yeah.
probably beat him by 30 points or something like that. So it's not even like I mean he does fundraising and stuff like that. I see one or two Adam Schiff signs, but mostly it's like a foregone conclusion. He was well, the reason Trump hates him so much. I think he was one of the key people on one of the investigatory committees for his impeachment or something like that.
Yeah.
And so that's what really got him prominence and in Trump's crosshairs. But yeah, I think he'll probably pull it away without any much trouble without much trouble.
Do you think, because there's a lot of that with Trump saying, well, I want to prosecute someone who, like Adam Schiff, Shifty Shift, he calls him. And
Mhm.
then the Trump supporters will come out and they'll go, well, what Trump meant was, he feels like he's been attacked. And are, do you think that there's people who are still like, well, yeah, Trump says one thing, but he doesn't mean it? Do you think the general public finally are starting to see that no, the guy says what he means? If anything, he's the most honest politician ever, even though he lies a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's a little bit of a vibe shift where it's like he still has supporters, obviously. He still has people in dyed in the wool MAGA, but I do think it's less than in previous election cycles. I do think people are just kind of getting tired of him. He's yesterday's news, want to turn the page. I think like not going back was an effective slogan because it's just like, let's just move on, man.
Yeah.
Because you see like he did a panel with Univision Latino voters yesterday or a couple days ago, and you could just see the fatigue and the
Mm,
questioning, like we're just tired of this song and dance of the election was stolen and I have the biggest crowds. And you see it in the crowd size. I mean, he was the only one who cared about crowd size when in 2016. And now
mm,
it's come full circle because he cannot fill these mid-size arenas. And Kamala Harris is filling out the big ones that maybe he used to do.
mm.
And so that is one thing that gives me hope as imperfect of a signal as a crowd rally attendance is. It
Yeah.
shows me that the enthusiasm gap is real, and it makes me skeptical of some of the polling that shows it as very close and thinks that maybe if we have a polling error, it's going to go in the other direction and underestimate Kamala's strength because I just don't see this juggernaut that there was in 2016, maybe in 2020, where he's pumping his fist energetically with stadiums full of fans, and you have that sort of X factor.
Well, the whole thing, the problem with Hillary was that she was such a known entity. She wasn't that likable as a candidate. We were sort of tired of the Clintons. They'd been around forever. That mantle belongs to Trump now.
Yeah, that's actually something I've thought about. There was a video, and I don't think it was that widely seen, but it was just like a YouTube video that got a little bit shared.
Hmm.
And it was this guy talking about how he was afraid Trump was going to win in 2016 because he's a wrestling fan. And in wrestling, the most interesting thing always has to happen. And
Hmm.
Trump is the most interesting outcome of this election. He is an entertainer, and that was like his rationale, which is not, empirically perfect, but I think there's like a truth to it. I think there was like even a part of me in 2016 that's like, all right, what's behind door number two?
Hmm.
Where's this train gonna go? Like, and then in 2020, people were, it was controversial. Some people still supported him. He got more votes, I think, in 2020 than in 2016. But, people were out for Biden and they wanted to take the mantle away from Trump. But now it just feels like the most interesting thing that could happen this election is Kamala Harris. And
Yeah.
it's not particularly close. Like the idea of like going back to this same old dog and pony show that we've seen daily for 8 years, and we know it, and we're sick of it, and it's stupid. I just the amount of people who are really willing to put up with it, I think is less. And I could see there's still, people who don't want to vote for Harris because, they're Republicans and they live in that water and all that stuff. But honestly, I could see a lot of them just not turning up. Like I could see a lot of them being like, am I really gonna vote? I just don't, just not feeling it. I'm just not motivated enough to turn out on election day, you know. So I I see that as a possibility. That's one of the things I'm optimistic about.
Yeah, I think that fatigue that's there. And what's interesting is that as we're recording this, there's some reports coming out that Trump who's been canceling a lot of mainstream media appearances,
Mhm.
has canceled an appearance and given the excuse that he's exhausted. And
Mhm.
I think that's the first time I've ever had an emotion that I've shared with Trump, is that I feel exhausted as well. I don't know if this is going to lead to other things where I start grabbing women and become racist, but maybe that I mean, well, and as a human being, if he is one, no, he is one. He is the older candidate now. He is not take. He said he's not taking days off. His favorite sport is he can't golf because he genuinely had a threat on his life on the golf course. It looks like,
Mhm.
and he did get shot at and hit. So
Mhm.
as a emotion, I mean, that has to take a toll on a person when you're 79 or 80 years old.
Yeah. I mean, Bill Clinton is younger than him,
Yeah.
right? Or almost the same age in some cases. I'm not sure the exact timing, but it's
I think
like
they're
it's
2 months
crazy.
apart. Yeah. I think it's 2 months
Um,
that's there.
and I think that also like I mean, that really undercuts a lot of his strongman personality, right?
Yeah.
Like he's like he has all this bravado and machismo, and yet all of a sudden he's doing the things that they were going nuts about Hillary Clinton doing in 2016 with Hillary's health, and they were going nuts about Joe
Yeah.
Biden doing, and now in the critical stretch, a lot of his voters have to turn out on election day. They're not voting early. And so, all of a sudden his whole narrative is sort of coming apart at the seams. Um, and maybe it could be something more serious. Who knows? I mean, I was someone who was saying, Biden is not looking great. Maybe time
Yeah.
to throw in the towel. And so, it's not like this doesn't have fertile ground to take root in people's imaginations. Um, and I'm curious to see where it goes.
Well, I think I would have to hope. So and again, this is where I'm watching it from afar, so it's hard to know. But I suppose if you're in California, you're watching the rest of the country from afar because California is its own world. But
Yeah.
if it was still Biden and Trump, you and I would still be big supporters of Biden. We would have, even though he's slipping a little, he's old, that would have been our justification. But we believe in the policies, we believe in the messaging. We're still going to be invigorated and want to get out and inspire people to vote. But there would have been exhaustion all around.
Hmm.
Now you've got this, you and I are in the same place. We're banked. And now you've got someone like Kamala who, well, is bringing energy,
Hmm.
possibly is bringing women to the table. Maybe we'll bring out some counter misogyny against her, but
Hmm.
those people probably would have voted for. I mean, I guess maybe that flare factor that you're talking about, maybe that's what's going to lift us out of this
Yeah,
nightmare.
I mean, you see when you talk about volunteering, like I'm a guy who
Mm,
would like volunteer, if it was
yeah,
Biden. And I'd be like, come on, guys, I swear we got to do this. But you feel like it's a much heavier lift. And you
yeah,
talk to people who are in campaign offices who are recruiting volunteers, and they're like night and day. Like the amount of people who want to volunteer for Harris versus volunteer for Biden is
yeah.
just totally different. And you see that it's like it's one of the most discreet victories I can remember in my political
Mm,
lifetime, where it's like voters were constantly saying Biden is too old, in polling and everything like that. They don't like these two options, Biden and Trump. And then they got what they wanted. They got a different candidate who is not old and, has perfectly good health. And all of a sudden you saw the polls move dramatically in a way
yeah.
that like, I mean, we're in an age of polling stasis where like it seems like nothing moves the polls.
Yeah.
And that happened, and then boom, it was a whole different ballgame. So yeah, I would certainly be putting my pedal to the floor for Biden, but I am very glad that Kamala's there, and I do think it is getting people to turn out. I do think it is, help making people more likely to like share content in their social media, talk to their friends,
Mm.
create a culture around excitement to vote that would not really be replicated if it was just like, yeah, I'll vote for Biden, but that's all I'm going to do, even among people who are generally higher engagement.
And so the stuff that she's come out with policy wise, I know you're an advocate for housing issues and
Yeah.
you do work in that area now.
Mhm.
Um, do you think that the stuff that she's talking about for housing, is that resonating? Do you think it's a viable plan? Because I think it's like helping first time buyers and a build initiative. And I think those are the core things that she's focused on.
Yeah. So people in the pro housing movement have been elated at the rhetoric and the signals,
Okay.
where it's like we were these nerds talking about zoning and housing production for 10 years, and everyone was like, what are you on? Like, you are
Uh,
lost into this
I'm
like
talking
weird
about that
internet
all the
rabbit hole.
time, Toby. Every conversation I have is about zoning permits.
And then we get like, it's like Kamala in the debate and, and I think the VP debate, a few other events, all of a sudden it's like housing front and center. Like
Mm,
there was someone who did a chart where it's like how many times housing has been mentioned in 2016, 2020, and 2024. And it's like 0, 0, 30, and like in these high profile events. Um, in terms of the actual policy, the big thing that people are excited about is 3 million new homes over the status quo production, which is a few million. So that is the big issue, is that there are just not enough homes that have been built for decades, especially in
mm,
really high demand areas, and that has caused prices to spike. That has caused a lot of people simply mathematically not being able to live there, having to move out to the suburbs, having to move out to exurbs and smaller cities, and then these smaller cities are all of a sudden like, wow, housing is much more expensive here. Oh my God,
yeah.
someone do something about this. So being able to finally break the logjam that has existed, particularly at the local level, because people who are involved in housing politics tend to be huge nerds or very old people who are on their HOA board and hate anything new.
Yeah.
And so for a long time, the status quo has been don't change anything. Any changes in popular, more process, years longer to produce a small building or whatever. And now it's like we're getting from the top down, the signal that like the thing that we are going to do, the good thing to do for people who are liberal and want to make our country better and stronger is to build housing. And that is really huge. And we hope it'll really overcome a lot of the barriers at the local level. In terms of stuff like, there's other things that she's proposed. The $25,000 home buyer credit is like one of those things where it's like, it'll help a bit. There's some concern like, is it going to help is it going to just like raise demand, which
Right.
without increasing supply, and that'll just increase prices. It seems like there's some things that she's doing where it's like tax credits for building new homes or for first-time home buyers, where it's like a little bit like, is this actually? There's a problem in housing policy too, where stuff tries to be too targeted, where it's like,
Mm,
okay, you can build an apartment building here, but only if it wasn't occupied by a renter in the last 5 years, and they have to have been earning below this and below that, and then like the person who lives in the building has to. The person who wants to build the building has to live in it. And like you put so many strings attached that it ends up being like, well, fuck it. I'm just not going to, no one is actually going to do this. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Um, and so some of the policies are definitely seem crafted to be something that resonates with politically more so than actually effective at, reducing the housing crisis. But the big top line of saying housing is good and producing millions more units is really excellent. And so that's what we're most excited about in the housing world. And because the movement has been, snowballing amongst
Mm,
nerds like me for many years. There are like a lot of policies in place, or a lot of policy proposals and ideas in place that
right.
are kind of ready to go, that will be effective even if they're a little more like under the radar, cutting red tape, reforming these obscure, codes and things like that. And so I'm really excited about the potential for that, and the potential for locally, like in California, which has had probably the worst housing crisis in the country for decades now, um, where it'll give like local politicians the cover to be like, we're implementing the Harris plan that you all voted for, and
Right.
they don't have to take the blowback from Joe on next door who's 75 years old and is like, what about the overcrowding in my sprawl suburb? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Or what about the traffic, from five extra cars on my street, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So that makes sense. And I mean, it sounds exciting. It sounds interesting to have somebody who's talking about an area that you're into and care about, and, has at least some concrete proposals versus the other guy who was a slumlord. So
Yeah.
these are the choices that we're facing, America. This is what
Hmm.
it's all about. Um, with the comedy scene there,
Hmm.
because I mean, I've only, I mean, I started my comedy life in the UK, and I've done, the bulk of my performing here. I've been to comedy in New York and Philadelphia, and then I went to an open mic in the Pacific Northwest where my dad is from. Last time I was home,
I
it
saw the
doesn't
Olympia
feel.
sign behind you.
Sorry, the Olympia beer. It's in the water. Um, what I noticed is it doesn't feel like people talk about politics, which is we're all so passionate about it. I mean, how is the comedy scene for politics? Do people avoid it? Do you do political comedy when you're in the US? Or I mean, is it different than what you talked about here?
Um, so when I started doing political comedy kind of stuff in around, I would say 2012 or something, 2011,
Hmm.
really in earnest, and really focusing that on a thing because I saw it not being talked about, or
Yeah.
only being talked about at a very superficial level in the States. There would be something that's on the front page of every newspaper in America, and I go to an open mic. It's like, hey, so you guys dating? Or, it's just,
What about cats and dogs?
yeah, it was just like, it was like so disconnected. So I ran a political podcast and comedy show where people would do stand up on like political topics, followed by a discussion with experts in the audience. I
Yeah.
ran that from like, well, actually, I did a series with Ola Bajabiamila, who was a
Oh
British
yeah.
comic that lives in Dubai. We did a YouTube series about politics
That's
in like
right. Yeah.
2014 or so. But I started getting into that. And then in 2014 was around when I feel like this new wave of political consciousness came about and
Mm.
politics became much more front and center. So after that, it did definitely come up on stage more. It was still not maybe as much as I would have expected. Um, and it tended to be kind of the same premises, like a very limited set of, premises around this political figure, that political figure, or the economy, is good, the economy is bad, or like, it didn't feel like very like nuanced. And so I kind of wanted to make it like more like, really connected to the truth and the details and the more niche issues of what was going on in politics and do stand up around that. And it was like phenomenally unsuccessful. But
I mean, that's a brilliant way to describe to describe it. I mean, because it's hard because comedy doesn't do well if you're earnest about something. And if you genuinely
it's
care about it, that's hard to make funny.
it is very hard. And it's hard to do the double lift of talking to a general audience and
Mm,
getting them to understand the premise of a very nuanced thing that they may have
yeah.
never heard or thought of before, and then get
Yeah.
a punchline out of it. It's not impossible, but it's a lot
It's
harder.
a,
And
it's a pain in the ass. Yeah, because I used to do, I mean, my set at the moment isn't that political, my normal stand-up set that I do on a weekend or something. But
Mhm.
10 or so years ago, I would pepper politics in with it, and I had some very sophisticated material about the Tea Party and teabagging. Oh, it was clever. And I was doing it in the big clubs here in the UK because the advantage I have is I can do jokes about American politics here, whereas
Yeah.
In Britain you can't do jokes about British politics because no one would know who the fuck you're talking about. But here I could, the big figures and Sarah Palin at the time or whatever it was that was the Tea Party era, and I had another comic come up to me. He's like, "Eric, you're so brave because you talk about politics. I could never do that." And I'm like, all of my jokes were like teabagging, but I just use political references. I'm like, there's nothing sophisticated in what I'm doing. So it does have to be very quick and very accessible. And if it's too complex, I suppose, then that's where it can get in the way. But do you see now in the current comedy scene where politics is infusing everything? When I've gone to gigs in the last year or two in the States, it's just not part of the conversation. Are people just afraid of pissing off half the audience if they
I wouldn't say
mention
that
political
because
topics?
I would say like, it's by the city you're in, what the general
Mm,
consensus will be.
yeah,
And even honestly, like it's even when I go and I know there's like some conservatives in the audience, I don't know. It once in a while you get like a heckler or something like that. But for the most part, I found that I was able to get a lot away with more than people anticipated because most people just don't care that much. And people who are like
mm,
super right wing and like are just not coming to comedy shows. They're just like at church or something. I don't know.
yeah,
I don't know what they're doing, but maybe they're on 4chan, who knows? But they're not generally like going out to the comedy club and say downtown Indianapolis, right? If Indiana's a red state, if I go to a comedy club in downtown Indianapolis and I do a joke about Trump, it's not like there's going to be like a uprising.
yeah.
Um, oh, sorry, hold on. Did you hear
I would,
that?
that's right. But I would
Um,
imagine it's like anything. If you can show some self-awareness and self-deprecation about
that's
yourself,
what I
and then
was.
you have the room to joke about maybe something that might be touching on what they care about a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. That was something I would always open with stuff that was more self-deprecating because like once you show you don't take yourself too seriously, it doesn't come across as like preachy and know-it-all as if
Yeah.
you just like launch into aren't I the smart one and everyone else is dumb. Um, so I found that was like a way to make it to get into it. Uh and when I've gone to shows now, I will say that, and I don't do comedy as much as I used to.
Yeah.
And I'm not going I have two small children now, and I'm not like traveling to a lot of different cities to get a sense of like how they feel or what the atmosphere is there. So I can't be completely credible on, someone as an authority here. That's my self-deprecation. I'm going to tell you,
Yep.
you might
That's
really. But like I do think that people are, talking about like, I don't know, race or gender or like Me Too, or more like the cultural side of politics, I think
yeah.
gets more airtime in stand-up than stuff like, this is what Biden did.
Right.
That's the sort of more accessible frame, which maybe tells you something about, how people consume politics and what people really connect with, you know.
Mm. Yeah, that's true. Well, I mean, the way we talk about race in the States is so different than it is here in the UK.
Oh, for sure,
So
yeah.
that's a whole different kettle of fish. Um, I just want to ask you a couple more quick things before I let you go, and I really thank you for your time. Um, One is, I mean, is there anything else of the Senate races or anything else that you've been keeping a particular eye on, or because I know the Senate's in the balance, the House is in the balance. Are there any other races that you think are really particularly interesting to you, or just the whole battle itself?
I mean, this is one where, I mean, I know the Senate and control of Congress is tightly contested. This is one of I can't remember another election, say possibly, even I would say considering 2020 and 2016,
Mm,
where it felt like the real key was the presidency. Because
yeah.
honestly, I feel like if Harris wins and she's pivoted in kind of like a more centrist leader, pro-America, president for everyone kind of a direction, I feel like if she had a Republican Congress, with a narrow majority or something, I think she would still be able to do a lot of the things that I think personally are most important, like housing reform, like permitting reform, these
Mm,
sorts of things that um, are really important, but have, not had, uh, I don't think they've not gone forward. I mean, you saw Biden, even with the divided Congress, got stuff like the CHIPS Act and
mm,
Inflation Reduction Act and stuff like that. So I do think it is possible to get some of that bipartisan legislation. And also, I think that if Trump goes down in flames, there will be there has to be some kind of reckoning in the Republican Party where there's like, what direction do we go in now? Because something has to rise from the ashes, and I'm sure at least some of the senators or Congress people will be willing to be like, okay, you know, I'm not gonna refuse to vote for a border bill because someone who just lost a presidential election told me not to. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Like, so I'm very focused on the presidency in this one. Other than that, I mean, there's some state level stuff, ballot measures on housing issues that I'm looking at. There's some, ones in other states around abortion,
Mm,
that will attract attention, about like, you know, legalizing weed and stuff like that. But I feel like that's more kind of status quo for an election over the
yeah.
last couple of years. The presidency really is what I'm most focused on.
And I'm going to put you on the spot. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think she can pull it out?
If I had to put my money on it, and I have literally put my money on it on predictit.com, I would pick Kamala Harris. I
Yeah.
definitely bet on it when I felt more optimistic, and now I have butterflies in my stomach going down the
Yeah.
stretch. I do believe I believe she is the most likely to prevail. And I think that there's an upside of a landslide, maybe
Mm.
like a, +5 or +6 result that is not there for Trump. So I feel comfortable saying that she has the best chance. And if you ask me who's going to win, I'm going to say her. But do I feel as comfortable as I would like to? No. Do I think that there's a chance that Trump wins? Absolutely. And I'm not taking anything for granted.
Yeah, I think so. And, I think, well, yeah, it feels like that direction of travel feels better. And I seem to remember feeling better than I did, I think even in some ways in 2020 and definitely in 2016. So,
Mhm.
because I do remember feeling deep unease. And I want to go back and watch the show I did right before that election, where I think I did say, well, I think Hillary will win. But in the back of my mind, every night when I did it at the Edinburgh Festival, I was like, she's gonna lose. Ah! Um, but Toby, it's been so good to see you again. Thank you so much for giving your time, and hopefully in 2.5 weeks or so, we can pop a virtual glass of something.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me back on. It was a real pleasure to talk to you.
There we go. That was Toby Morishanu. Thank you so much, Toby, for coming on. It was great to have an in-depth discussion on something like policy, an area that housing policy, something that I don't know a lot, and to know that the policy she's proposing with Republicans going, she's got no policies, because that's how Republicans talk, is actually not true. She does have some policies, some good, some bad, but that's the kind of thing you want to be hearing about in a presidential election. How rare these days. It was also interesting to have a little chat about comedy and kind of see what the scene is like and the dynamics of the challenges of doing political comedy, which is not necessarily easy unless you go the low ball rate the way I did and just talk about teabagging. But it was great to have Toby on. Thank you so much for giving your time. Thanks to Mark, the producer, for putting everything together. And thank you for listening. And if you haven't already, please go and vote. We'll see you next time. Bye bye.